All right, welcome everybody. My name is Jen Rowe from the City of Boston, chair of the Boston Region MPO's TIP Process Engagement Readiness Committee, and I'm gonna now call this meeting to order. I'll read through some of our introductory notices and guidelines. Notice of non-discrimination. You're invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veterans status, or background. Then we have some first accessibility statement. Accessible to folks with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Erin McGuire of MPO staff at emaguire@ctps.org or 857-702-3681, or via the chat box. Right now for the guidelines, all participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. We do ask that you rename yourself, include your first name, last name, and your affiliation. After roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves, but please always do remain muted unless you're actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, you can select the raise hand function that is either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen. A window pops up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. I'll then call on participants to speak. And then you can raise your hand via Zoom if you would. Oh, actually, so this is a question. Could you please now raise your hand via Zoom if you would like to use an AI note taker during this meeting? Right. Seeing none, this meeting will, of course, be recorded and posted on the MPO meeting calendar afterwards. And staff do create very detailed notes, some of which we'll be approving today. And then finally, if you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. Great. So for anyone who just joined, my name is Jen Rowe. I chair this committee and also represent Mayor Michelle Wu in the City of Boston. I'll call upon the other members of the committee, starting with MassDOT Department or Massachusetts Department of Transportation, Seat 1, OTP.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Jen. This is Chris Clem, MassDOT OTP.
Thanks, Chris. Now MassDOT Seat 2, Highway Division or Project Management.
Lily Slotto in for John Bouchard, Deputy Chief Project Development Engineer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for joining us. Metropolitan Area Planning Council. All right, circle back. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Is here.
Excellent. Erin Shute from the town of Brookline informed me she wasn't able to make it today. But so next we'll go to town of Arlington.
This is John Alessi with the town of Arlington.
Thanks, John. Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Brad Rawson here from Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Thanks, Brad. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham. Okay, circle back. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton. Okay, and then Metro West Regional Transit Authority.
Jim Nee, Administrator.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Did anyone, other committee members who I didn't call upon or joined a little bit later?
I do not see Eric or Julia from MAPC, and I don't see Dennis from Framingham. So
okay, we will. If they join later on, we'll introduce them. And again, seeing Tom also joining. Brad from Somerville. Great. Because I want to leave plenty of time for discussion today, I won't have everyone else introduce themselves verbally, though I do welcome non-members of the committee who've joined us to introduce themselves in the chat with their name and any affiliations they have. And we do today have two sets of minutes to approve, as I mentioned earlier, and then we'll devote the majority of the meeting to continuing our tip development debrief, informed by some of the survey results. Big thank you to the 11 members who took the survey. It was a great response rate. And we'll also review a draft set of readiness expectations and a draft requirement for project rescoring. But before I turn that over to Adriana to start that all out, I'd like to move to public comments. We usually offer this at the beginning of meetings, but also we do welcome non-members to contribute to the discussion throughout the meeting as time allows. So definitely no pressure to speak now if you think your comment's more appropriate for something else on the agenda. That all said, anyone want to speak at this moment? All right, seeing none, I'll move on to the meeting minutes. Oh, and it's Ethan. Over to Ethan.
Thank you, Chair. This next item here is just a discussion and vote to approve minutes for the March 27th meeting of this committee. Staff are just requesting that this committee votes to approve the minutes.
All right. Does anyone have any questions about the March 27th meeting minutes? All right. Oh, Brad.
Move to approve as drafted. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Do you have a second?
John Alessi will second that.
Thanks, John. All right. We will call roll. First, Mass. Seat 1,
Mass.C1, yes.
Mass. Seat 2,
Mass.C2, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Diggins, yes.
Town of Arlington,
John Alessi, yes.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville,
Intercore, yes.
Metro West Regional Transit Authority.
MWRTA, yes.
Fantastic. I believe that passes. General City of Boston, yes. We'll move on to the second set. Is there anyone who has questions about the May 15th meeting minutes or has a motion to approve? Chris.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone want to second that?
I'll second that, Chair. This is Brad.
Thanks, Brad. Let's call roll. Mass.Seat 1,
Mass.C1, yes.
Mass.Seat 2,
Mass.C2, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Diggins, yes.
Great. Town of Arlington,
John Alessi, yes.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville,
Brad Robson, yes.
Metro West Regional Transit Authority.
Jim Nee for MWRTA, yes.
Great. General City of Boston, I'll also vote yes, and that set of minutes also is approved. So we'll move now to next item on the agenda, the kind of continuation of our conversation around debriefing the tip development of this past cycle. Over to Ethan.
I'm actually going to start out here, but I will pass it to Ethan eventually. Well, thank you all for filling out the survey. I'm going to start on a debrief of this past tip development cycle. So first, starting off with some positives of the past tip development season. There was almost unanimous agreement that we considered fewer unscored projects compared to previous years. In fact, all but one of the new projects were scored. And the only unscored project was a transit transformation project submitted by the MBTA as a fill-in for federal fiscal year 2026. As a comparison to last year, none of the fill-in projects were scored. But however, staff did not score some of the unscored core investment program projects that have been on the tip for the past several years due to lack of information on project details. But as Ethan will go into more detail on later during this presentation, MPO staff are aiming to solicit more of that information this summer in order to obtain the information needed to score those projects. Next, we had several high-scoring and well-understood projects in the outer tip years. After a bit of a decline in tip application volumes, we finally had an uptick this year, and not only an uptick in applications, but we also had several high-scoring applications. And to put this in perspective, we had 4 new project applications that scored over 60 points out of 100 this year, while last year we had none. And now areas for improvement, a bit of a longer section. Committee members, we're split on whether or not fewer projects were delayed than in previous cycles. And this is likely because although fewer projects were technically delayed, this might not really reflect project readiness because most of the delays were in the nearer years. So projects that might that might need a delay in the later years might not actually be getting that delay yet. So we might kind of just be pushing the can down the road a little bit. Next, as for cost changes, there was pretty unanimous disagreement of the idea that we had a better handle on the cost changes of projects. And later on in this presentation, when we discuss the readiness policy improvements, Ethan will present some ideas on how we can ensure both frequent and regular communication with project proponents so that the board and the public can have a better idea of cost changes. And unsurprisingly, as we only funded 1 new core investment project in the outer years of the TIP, committee members agreed that funding more projects in the outer years could be an area for improvement. And lastly, committee members were pretty split as to whether or not we had a strong selection of projects to program in the inner years of the TIP. And I'll go on to explain that in the next slide. So although the MPO staff scored several fill-in projects in the Transit Transformation Program, many of these ended up being amended on to the 2025 TIP, leaving some unscored projects to be funded in federal fiscal year 2026. There was also not a lot of diversity with regards to the investment programs being represented, as most of the projects were transit projects. And then before we move on to discussion about this path to development cycle, I just want to share some of the comments from the committee members that haven't yet been reflected in the previous slides. So first, one member stated, when I think about the 9-month TIP journey this year, I'm optimistic, but when I focus on the critical April 3rd board meeting, I am deeply concerned that staff, board members, and proponents will conclude that we are treading water at best and backsliding at worst. And on that note, another member stated that we did a fair amount of work to develop an alternative scenario, and it was summarily dismissed by the board chair. There seems to be a misunderstanding of the tipper role at that point in the process. So these both center on the theme of the relationship between the TIP committee, and the wider MPO board, and suggesting that we could, an interest and a need for further discussion on this topic. And next, one member stated that they were concerned that various municipal and state proponents did not maximize the value of the MPO's new readiness processes. And similarly, another member stated that the process is getting better, but the logjam and threat of funding squeezes are worse. Lastly, and I'll summarize this one here, we received a comment stating that although there are many issues facing the TIP outside of the control of the board and the committee, we are well positioned for the future. So these comments reiterate the need for more enforcement of our processes so that we can keep pace with the issues facing the TIP. And we'll talk a bit about this more when we talk about our new readiness policy guidelines. And now, before I open it up for discussion, I'll just read aloud the top 5 most requested, or the 4 most requested projects, topics for discussion. So, oh, I'm sorry. I guess there are 7 of them. Sorry. So first, were fewer projects delayed than in previous cycles? Did we have a better grasp of project cost changes? Did we have ample opportunities to review information, ask questions, and discuss alternatives and their implications before voting? Was the rationale for our decisions about programming or delaying projects clear, fair, and aligned with the regional priorities described in the Long-Range Transportation Plan? And next, did we take a more active role in getting municipalities to put forward designs for projects and getting projects in the pipeline? Do you feel optimistic about the prospect of the TIP process improving year to year? And did we build collaborative relationships with project proponents? So, of course, if you have a comment on a different topic, totally okay, but these were just the 7 or so most requested topics. So let me know if you'd like to go back to any previous slides, and I'm going to open it up for discussion.
Thanks, Adriana. It's a really helpful table setting. yeah, kind of echo the invitation. And I'll first look to members, and then we can move to members of the public. Len, I see you took yourself off mute.
Well, yeah, sorry. Well, you're gonna force my hand on this one. So I will just kind of jokingly say on the one about do you feel optimistic about the prospect of the TIP process improving year to year? We need to ask alongside that, I mean, are you a glass half empty or glass half full type of person? Because I think that will determine how anyone answers that question. But I am optimistic about it improving just because this is a good group. I mean, we put a lot of work into, trying to make the overall process better. I mean, so I'm confident, that it'll be better. How much, is to be determined, but it'll be better. That's it. Thank you.
To do introductions, name, affiliation, and are you a glass half empty or full person? Yeah. Curious. Brad.
Jen, I think maybe the chair, the simplest answer I can give to some of these great prompt questions is a positive yes answer on two of them that this board has talked about a lot, that staff have advised about a lot, and that the Tipper Committee has sunk its teeth into. One of those is building and diversifying the pipeline of municipal proponent projects. For several consecutive years, we obviously saw a real drying up of that kind of bench, and we all identified it as a problem. And this year, we were successful in getting new applicants into the process. So let's take that glass half full approach, as Len said, and note that. The second thing that I'll call attention to is that for several years, the MPO board have talked about the importance of making sure our partners at the MBTA have an equal opportunity to identify projects early in processes and are, has a seat at the table that is equivalent to our partners at Mass DOT and to the municipalities. And we clearly saw MBTA rise to the occasion. I think the first couple of years, there was some struggle with information flow, and this year was better than previous years. So I want to give a tip of the cap to all the folks working on those challenging processes at the MBTA, and a tip of the cap to the staff and board members and the Mass DOT partners who have really followed through in good faith to create that space for our transit providers to really feel like they've got a good seat at the table. I'm going to hold off on comments on the other 5 questions. Just wanted to quickly flag those 2. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Eric.
Hi all, sorry, for some reason this meeting wasn't on my calendar, but I'm really happy that it is happening and happy to jump in. I just wanted to say that I think we're doing a little reflection, right, on how did the process go. I mean, I think despite projects continuing to go up in cost and not being ready, I think Ethan and I think the staff did a fabulous job with the information they had, and I think trying to put scenarios together, and I think despite the challenges we put together a good tip. So I think reflecting on it, I think we're doing the best we can with the information we have. I think if we want to start talking about improvements, if that's the next agenda item, I'll save my comments for that. But I feel like we did the best job that we can with the information we have.
Thanks, Eric. Any other members want to jump in, and then I'll call in Dan. Right, over to Dan. Jeff. I don't know if there you go.
Yeah, there you go. I too believe that we have a glass half full, half empty problem. But here in Charlestown, we're very isolated from the rest of the city of Boston. We're mostly residential. And as such, our needs are a little like a city, a township or a city that's outside the city of Boston. And yet we don't get the necessary services to get connectivity, not just into our city, but also outwards too, into Cambridge and Somerville being the key ones for us. We're landlocked, and the pathways that we need to get in and out are very difficult and are also very much state-controlled vehicle ways in and out. So I'd like to see if the MPO can, I'm not expecting a vote here, but get more involvement of residential elements of Boston to have more say or input into the dialogue. That's it.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. And I know our Stella and others on MPO staff are working really hard to kind of get more of those voices from communities and outside of just the folks who work in the transportation realm. So really appreciate that. Len.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to gauge how much effort I want to put into thinking about this part of the agenda, how much more time do we have for this part of the agenda?
Yeah, I think there's no set time, but I think approximately like another 10-15 minutes or so.
Okay, all right. Wait, so on the top question on the slide, I mean, I guess the question is it on this group to play a more active role in getting municipalities to put forward designs for projects? Because that wasn't apparent to me. I kind of saw that more as a staff thing, coming at the direction of the MPO board. I mean, clearly the board wants to have more projects, and then we would look to staff to implement that. But if that's a role for this committee, then I think we certainly need to put some time and effort into doing that, which would probably be more meeting times for us. Like probably in the summertime, well, maybe even year round, towards working with communities, in order to help them put forward designs. So that's kind of a question to you. And maybe whoever on the staff wants to answer that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think and certainly staff to jump into just a quick consensus is that I think there are ways we can encourage municipalities without necessarily like just in terms of maybe making speaking to maybe some of the other questions that were in terms of alignment with the LRTP. Like I think the more that we define what we're really looking for as a region, there may be some ways that we can proactively start helping municipalities think about and move forward the types of projects that we see as important for that longer term vision. Just one thought connected to that, but Brad, did you have something to add there too?
But actually, my question though is it for this committee, to take on a more active role, or is this question more geared towards the MPO in general? So if that top question is more geared towards the MPO and the staff in general, then I understand. But if it's really geared towards this committee, taking a more active role, then I'm wondering if that's really our job.
Sure. Yeah, I'll see if Brad has thoughts around that, and I can offer some.
Sure.
Thanks, Chair. I could respond with my thoughts to Len's question, and then I have a couple of other thoughts, but since I've already spoken once, I actually would love to hear John's before I go. So do you mind coming back to me after I answer my perspective on Len's specific question? My perspective on Len's specific question is that we set up this committee to do many things, including what you described, Len, including to document our preferences and our processes, our risk control measures, and to serve as capacity builders to the entire board to do many things, including diversifying the pipeline of project proponents, really emphasizing smaller communities that don't have huge staffs, emphasizing sub-regions that don't have as much of a history of getting TIP projects funded, identifying risk factors that we've all talked about for months and months and months now, like utility coordination, like right-of-way coordination, like the role and responsibility of project handoff and design handoff between municipality and DOT. So I think my short answer is yes, TIPR has a role in addressing that challenge.
Thanks, Brad. John, did you have something to add to this question or something else?
No, I mean, I
I think the same thing as Brad and Len, really, with kind of, getting new projects on, but just want to note that it seemed like coming out of the tip process this year, we also need to do some work to kind of like fix the existing projects we have on the tip right now. We've got I know we'll talk about this with the improvements agenda item, but just kind of making a defined like guideline for how we're going to handle the projects that have been on the tip for a long time, that are being delayed, that are having cost increases. I really want to see new projects. I'm just not sure how we can do that without first addressing all of the existing issues we have. So I'd be very curious in the next agenda item to hear people's thoughts on the improvements we can make, but still think we really need to diversify projects this year, and future years in general. So it's just not the inner core.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. And yeah, Len.
Yeah, so then just to be clear, I am for the tip, the MPO playing a more active role in getting municipalities put forward designs. It's more that if it's staff that we're counting on to do this, as we count on them to do many things, then what I would like is a report, and it doesn't have to be anything really like formal with lots of bullets or whatever on what they did, in terms of getting municipalities to put forward designs, and how that contrasted to the previous year or previous years, and then what they think can be done, to help in the future do with more of that, and then how we can be of assistance in doing this. So I was just trying to understand like whose primary responsibility is it for getting municipalities to put forward designs. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And do you think it seems like staff did a great job this year, and that we did see more projects, and so that's a great suggestion of like maybe hearing a little bit in a future meeting about what's been done, and we can all kind of as a committee share any additional opportunities we may see as well. So thanks for that, Len. I see Brad and then Tom.
Again, Jen, I've just spoken a couple of times. I had a couple of things that build on John's points, but I'd actually love to hear Tom's perspective.
Okay, Tom.
Actually, mine was more, and I know I brought this up before, on why some municipalities don't submit projects. And it's because I think, and I've talked to some of them, they just don't have the staff to do it. And I think that's been a problem. We've tried to, I think with our staff, we've tried to help with that. But if there's, and I think we might have talked at this previous years, if they were able to set aside funds or staff time to work with some of the different cities and towns that again don't have a large planning staff, that might be helpful. I do know, talking to some of the more suburban towns, especially, they, that's why they don't. And then on top of it, then they look at, what's their return on investment. So the amount of time and money spent to try to get onto the tip, what are their odds of getting there? And then just a comment, I thought, especially the last couple of tips, we've done a pretty good job spreading the funding across the region, and not everything is in the inner core. So I just kind of wanted to state that, because I thought we've done a pretty good job trying to, not just center on the inner core, and to, making sure that, we're trying to be as, try to spread it out a little bit as much as we can, to kind of be even-handed with our decisions. So, and then I think the last piece would be, again, just touching on, the issues that, with the cost overruns and things like that. I think we need to look at the consultants here, also, because I get the feeling sometimes, especially with these last minute things, are something that's on the tip. And I think the thought's been, oh, no matter what we do, they never take a project off the tip. But when you see some of these mega increases in projects, sometimes, and maybe this is the suspicious nature that I have sometimes, is that they know about this going into it, but they're not being totally, forthcoming with what those costs are until after we take a vote, and then they're in for an amendment, 6 months later, and it's adding 10-15 million dollars to a project. And sometimes I feel like that, I wonder sometimes if that's a strategy that, the consultants have put forward, because we have, I can't remember ever taking a project off, so maybe, unfortunately, we might have to look at that. And I think we've talked too about reevaluating projects. So if they come in with a certain percentage increase, then maybe that's like, okay, time out. We're going to now reevaluate the project, because would we have approved the project with this new dollar amount if we knew all the information when we asked for it. So just general thoughts that I've had over the years on some of these issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Brad.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, group, for a good discussion. As I look back at those discussion prompts, again, to kind of shift a little bit to the glass half empty perspective, topics for discussion: fewer delays, better grasp of cost changes, collaborative relationship with project proponents. Those three are really tightly linked. And when we reflect back on our work this year, clearly there are a handful of really tricky projects that gave the board and the staff a heck of a hard time. Most recently, we went through a lot of challenge with Western Avenue in Lynn, a project that everybody is excited about, that we admire and support Lynn's work and advocacy to bring transportation safety and equity solutions to their critical city. And yet information flow was not ideal, far from it. In fact, at our most recent full board meeting, we heard some very concerning information about continued project cost escalations. And we find ourselves wondering, as the TIPR committee, why didn't we find out about those estimates earlier in a process? We provided every opportunity. Another pain point through this process that I think may have some different inputs to it is the Belmont Rail Trail project, another incredibly important project, great community support and advocacy, but really tricky interagency coordination and information flow that resulted in multiple project cost estimate spikes during the TIP development process. A third one that probably has slightly related kind of journey, the Hingham project, where we heard great advocacy on this important project from the town of Hingham. And we heard about scope creep that the town described as being not their decision, and feeling like control had been relinquished, and suddenly schedule, scope, and cost were impacted due to handoffs between municipal and state project proponents. So those are three examples. Another one, again, I just want to be really transparent in all of this, everybody. The Chelsea projects, we are all committed. This MPO has funded the city of projects in the city of Chelsea consistently over the last 5+ years. And yet we had some real kind of question marks about who is asking for certain projects to be advanced or delayed, even despite all of our great process improvements that we've made. And at one MPO meeting, we have notes and minutes that say city has asked for this to be deferred and delayed, or even taken off of the tip. And then at a subsequent meeting, we've got municipal staff, elected officials, et cetera, coming in and saying, whoa, excuse me, please put this back on. It puts staff in a really hard position, and it puts the board in a hard position. So I think there are obvious areas that we can focus on, using those projects not as scapegoat moments, Chair, but as teaching moments, and things that perhaps can be categorized to say, what are the likely stumbling blocks for project development so that we can continue to get better and reduce delays, have a better grasp of cost changes, and continue to build collaborative relationships between project proponents. Thanks for bearing with me.
Oh, thank you. I think those are, important points, and speaking to how much a lot of this is interconnected, and each project being unique, of course, but also we've been seeing some patterns that keep happening, and how do we do better in kind of learning from them, taking action. Over to John.
Thanks, Jen. I know we probably want to move on to the next section, but I just had a question, one last question regarding the debrief of this past tip cycle. So I know that we, as a committee, kind of, we made a recommendation to the full board. I know that like previously kind of like some members indicated a little bit of rush going into it, but and then, we brought our recommendation to the board and we kind of, like it seems like the scenarios we even looked at were completely like picked apart and everything like that. So I just wanted to ask a question. Is it still the official charge of this committee to kind of make a full recommendation on scenarios to the full board, or are we just here to kind of, provide something to react to? Like, just wanted to get some clarification on that.
Thank you for bringing that up, John. I do think that's an important thing for us to talk about. Yeah, I personally felt like in the prior cycle to this, we were sort of asked to sort of come up with some recommendations around, which invite in some project proponents and make a recommendation about the delay to, one or more of them. So yeah, that I guess was my, to be frank, my impression of part of our role, but be curious what others think about that. Len?
I mean, we definitely expect any recommendation that we bring, to the full board, to be examined and picked apart. I mean, that's a definite plus. We want more input into the process. And so if maybe what we're thinking is that we need more time to react to that, that's fine. And so we need to kind of adjust the schedule so we can react to the recommendation that we bring to the board, especially the first time that they see it. So yeah, I mean, I can't imagine otherwise, because we're such a small subset of the full committee. And if they weren't doing that, then either they're not paying attention or they're not understanding what we're saying. So yeah, having that, yeah, I said enough. I just repeat myself. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, so you're saying like it should be part of our scope to make a recommendation, but also we should give enough time for then the full board to fully consider that recommendation and not feel, necessarily, have time themselves to consider it and the pros and cons and all that. Is that accurate to what you're-
Yeah. And yes, we spend a lot more time at it, but still though, I mean, there's a lot of expertise, on that board. It's not like, we're presenting, to people, who really don't understand the process and haven't gone through many iterations, of tip, development, and so we definitely want their input. Now, if we want to develop our recommendations with additional input from them, then we need to bring people from the larger board into these meetings at a number that doesn't violate OML, but I think part of the process is just kind of putting it out there, like, here's our recommendation, have at it, folks. I mean, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. Yeah, and just for I do kind of a response. My understanding is that like the committee is at the max number of like folks who can be in this forum and not be a quorum of the larger MPO. Staff, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So it may be more that like we make a recommendation and just then talk to everyone else about it in the full board context, from my understanding. But again, staff, correct me if I'm wrong on that. And over to John and then Tom.
I think my hand's just been up. Let's go to Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks. I thought that, I've been on, subcommittees for years. We never expect being in a subcommittee that, well, because we put forward a recommendation that it's, automatically going to be accepted by the board. So we always expect that, there will be, we're just giving, what we think our recommendation is at the time. And then we're putting it forward to the board to have a full discussion and then make final decisions. I thought the issue this year was, though, that it kind of came across that, well, we shouldn't even be putting forward a recommendation, which is what kind of threw me at that meeting. Because why else would you have a subcommittee if you're not going to have, you got to put forward a recommendation. That's the whole point of that. So I think that was the issue, I think, this year. So, but I fully expect any time that a subcommittee puts forward something, that there's going to be discussions, and there may be something where sometimes the subcommittee can be so close to the issue, they're not seeing the forest through the trees sometimes, and then when it goes to the full board, they're like, "Well, what about this?" And it's like, "Hey, you know what? We never thought about that." So I always look forward to that discussion with the full board, because you have a lot more people and maybe coming from different perspectives too. So but that was my thought this time around. I think we need to clarify that with the TIPA committee. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, that's a great point about, getting very close to an issue and then, needing others to help you take a step back. Eric.
Yeah, Tom, just to like respond a little, I think the issue I just have with the recommendations coming out of this committee is, I think it's totally fine and appropriate for the committee to make some like high level policy or program recommendations, or even to make some recommendations about like a suite of projects or something like that. What I would hate to have happen is us to be taking a lot of like formal votes and having people making motions to move projects in and out of scenarios at this committee. Because what I worry is that then other members will say like, "Oh, well, that's like, I need to be on the TIPPER committee to get my project like in the recommendation," and that's where the horse trading is going to happen. And I feel like that's not what this committee is about. This is more policy program, and I feel like we need to stay closer to that and less to like, here's a scenario, I'm making a motion to take this, this project off. And so like John made a motion to like adopt a scenario, and that was a little like, I was like, oh wait, I'm not really ready to like vote on this. And so that I think is just the issue. And maybe we can find a time, if it's not today, another time, to just sort of discuss like what is the right level of recommendation to be making. And I would like us to stay away from like creating scenarios where we are like making motions to move projects on and off scenarios. That's my perspective.
Eric, just real quick, and I appreciate that. I think if we did something where we were proposing possible changes to scenarios, would that be, and I know what you mean, there's a scenario out there, the TIPPER committee, either tweaks it or does something and then votes to recommend that, I think to just make sure we're not, kind of doing that, that we might be able to put forward options to that scenario, that, staff or whoever is put together. And I would be fine with that, but again, you want to make sure the work of the committee is taken seriously and all that. But no, I agree with you on that. I can see where you're coming from.
And it could be that, that like, we discuss and then we say, the TIPPER committee discussed this and, is recommending these three things, but staff has not changed the scenario yet.
Yep.
Because I think that is an issue, right? Like, where publicly the scenario has now changed and it feels like we're now working off like that could be a way of addressing it, is sort of like the scenario has not changed yet, but like in in Jen's report or Ethan's report, we sort of capture what that discussion was.
Yeah. Makes sense to me if, like kind of and I think that's been what Steph has done, is kind of make sure that the same, and I think maybe we can make sure that everyone knows that also. I think that, the same scenario that gets presented to TIPPER is the scenario that gets presented to the MPO board. Maybe the committee, in my remarks about it, like committee thought, XYZ might be something that the full board might want to consider. But yeah, have the consistency there. Len, were you next?
You're muted, Len.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, Johnny's put his hand up and then put it down, and now it's back up. So, John, if you want to go before me, I'm fine. You know.
Go ahead, Len.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
So look, my understanding is that we get the scenarios, we discuss them, we have meetings with folks, and amongst ourselves, and in that through that, Ethan is able, to digest that and come up with alternative scenarios. So whether that is presented as a scenario or is presented to the board as well, here's the scenario, the typical committee discussed it, and here are the relevant points. I'm not going to give you like a scenario, but these are things that you want to keep in mind. It's going to equate to the same thing, with the exception being that if you don't have it laid out as a scenario, it's going to be hard for people to track it. So either way, that information from this committee, as digested by Ethan, needs to come before the board. Otherwise, we're not really adding any value, that we're sharing with the board. I think the whole point is for us to deliberate more, and then give the board more information based on our deliberation, which the board can accept or not. I don't know if that's really in contradiction to what Eric and Tom are saying, but certainly is my take on what I would like to see this committee do, and essentially what it did. I think what happened this cycle is that we then selected a scenario at whatever meeting it was. We came back here, we did more work. And we then presented variations on that scenario. Once again, it could have been stated as variations on the scenario, or it could have been just our notes passed along to the board. And the chair said, no, we picked this scenario and we're going with it. And I think, well, some of us, me in particular, thought, well, why did we even bother with coming up with another scenario if we're just going to take that one, and then figure out, in this meeting, taking no information from the TIP committee meetings, and make our decision. So I think we just need to clarify, like, at what point, is a scenario locked down, and there's no point in us discussing, the scenario. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. I want to go to John, but I also wanted to give an opportunity, if staff, Ethan and Adriana wanted to share kind of what their thinking is or was around, like, the evolution of scenarios through the board meetings to TIP committee meetings to board meetings. But no pressure to do so at this moment, but I wanted to give you an opportunity, Ethan.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak. I know that others have had their hand up for a while, so I'm also happy to speak after them, because most of what I will add is just some context from the past 2 years. So whatever you would like me to do.
Okay. John, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah. I just want to say, like, Eric, like, all the comments you've made, like, totally agree with them. I think they all make sense. And, like, at the previous Tipper meeting when we voted on a scenario, my thought was, okay, we just need to, like, make some sort of decision right now, because in my eyes, we're not, like, binding the full board to, like, only considering XYZ scenarios. I view it more as like we should be providing something to the full board to react to. And I get how it can be a little bit uncomforting to, vote on something quickly, and, like, the same concerns you said, where people think Tipper is the proper committee to kind of try and get considered onto the tip instead of the full board. I hear that a lot. So it's made me think that, maybe we need to think of a way where we're making a recommendation to the board with the purpose of getting the full board to react to it, because I think that's the best way to get feedback. You just put something out there and you see how people react to it. But I also want to make sure we're not, I want to make sure we're addressing the concerns you mentioned, because I think they're valid. So, but to Len's point, I also don't know how we can do that without making it formal recommendations. So that's all.
Thanks, John. Gonna go to Eric and then to JR.
I mean, and just to add, I would say a little more context, I think what happened this past year was that we had an MPO meeting where we focused on projects that were already on the tip. And we made a bunch of decisions and we had a scenario. Then we had a tipper committee where we talked about new projects adding to the tip, predominantly in like what were we going to do with 2030, and then we had like an MPO meeting after that. So some of it, I think, was that we kind of like chopped up it was like not we didn't have that full conversation about the tip like all at once. So that's something I think we can think about also, in how we do that with the, with the tipper meetings, and like the cadence of them. But I also think that like another thing we should think about is, I don't know how many voting members there are on this committee, but I think I abstained from that vote. I know MassDOT voted no. We should also think about like, if it's a 4-2 vote, or, like, do we want a policy to say like, a recommendation from this committee has to be unanimous, or, I mean, so I don't know, something for staff to think about too. Like when, if only 3 members are voting in the affirmative or something and others are abstaining, like, is that really a recommendation from the committee? Messaging to the group that there was like not consensus would be something appropriate too.
Thanks, Eric. Ethan, did you want to jump in before we go further?
Yeah, I can just quickly add some context as well, that part of why scenarios were included in meetings of this committee last year and also this year is based on the limitations around time in MPO meetings, as Len had alluded to fully synthesize new information when it's being presented. We have evaluated the schedule of tip of development to try to find ways we can give more time to MPO members to make decisions and to create additional forums to have those discussions. And due to the federal review and also state agency review components of the draft tip document, and that's not just MassDOT, that's also Mass DEP and other partners, we haven't been able to find additional time to allocate additional MPO meetings to scenario discussion. The only alternative is to lengthen MPO meetings and add further time. The other element, of course, is that the scenario format has been the best framework to convey information or possibilities in meetings consistent with the open meeting law, so that we can present information 1 week in advance rather than bringing it to the meeting so that members are seeing it for the first time. We can always try to give more options and more permutations, and try to get information earlier. We're still working and pushing on that front. One of the difficulties, however, is that the more choices that are provided in general, the more time again that we need to synthesize and work through each of those. That was just something that was brought up, and why it informed last year's strategy, and much of that strategy was attempted to be carried forward into this year as well. So just want to note that that was the original intent when staff had laid out the schedule for tip development back in October of last year during the kickoff for this committee.
Thanks, Ethan. Brad, is it okay if I go to JR and then go back to you? Great. JR.
Thank you, J.R. Fry, Town of Hingham. And I just wanted to offer up basically my perception as an observer, more than anything else, is that I would say that in the scenarios that are prepared by staff, those get reviewed with this committee, and I'm sure with members of the MPO board generally, and that's how the different scenarios get presented back to this committee. And so my kind of perception is that the scenarios themselves, with the recognition that, you know, staff have determined that they work to meet the goals of the MPO from a financial standpoint, like we're hitting the budget targets, those kinds of things. I would say that they carry an implicit endorsement from Tipper, regardless of whether or not a vote was taken. And so I'm not sure a vote is necessary on a recommendation to the full board. Like I would think that any of the scenarios that were presented this year could have worked. And I think that is really what the Tipper committee, that, again, just my outside perception, but that's what really the value added that the Tipper committee is providing is, you know, hey, these are the different projects that really fit into our existing framework. That's all.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, that's helpful. Input on, yeah, getting what it appears from someone who's not necessarily a committee member, in that, yeah, I think there is this like evolution of our decision making. I think the scenarios do help kind of break it into pieces, all of which have been reviewed by staff. So we know like none of those alternatives we would have chosen would have been particularly detrimental. Or I am certain Ethan and Adrian, I would not have proposed it. Over to Brad and then Len.
Thanks, Jen. I'll keep this comment quick. I really appreciate Eric bringing up the risk factors of politicizing this subcommittee's space and work. Tom Bent has talked about this for many years, about how this MPO used to have like 8 and 10-hour marathon, MPO readiness days. And sometimes the information shared there is technocratic, and sometimes it is really like more advocacy oriented. We do expect project proponents to be able to demonstrate community buy-in and support. We do expect and have a right to expect that proponents will take the time to attend either full board or Tipper meetings. But there's one key difference that I just want to call our attention to, because this conversation will continue. This MPO and this Tipper have worked to create readiness days, dedicated spaces where project proponents can come and dig into the weeds and talk about schedule and risk and cost control measures, roles and responsibilities. And so I just want to make sure that we don't think of as the Tipper regular meetings as the only spaces that can be for information sharing. I want folks showing up at our readiness days. And I was excited about the folks who did show up at the Tipper's readiness days this November and December and January. And I was really dismayed at some of the folks who didn't. So let's remember that there's a difference between technocratic and political advocacy, and the risk of kind of spaces being polluted or taken over with certain types of advocacy. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad. Over to Len, and then we might want to start transitioning towards moving on to our next agenda item.
Well, so in terms of just trying to get a sense of what to tell our larger group to expect from us, so once again, my feelings were that, or my thoughts was that this Tipper committee was created to give more capacity to the board as a whole, to think about the tip, and we carved out space for that discussion, and this committee is it, and it's a subset of the committee. When we were talking about setting this up, I was thinking, I wonder who's going to be on this committee, because I imagine everyone wanting to be on it. And then I was thinking, so probably what will happen is either we'll leave people who really want to be on it off, or we'll decide, well, instead of having this Tipper committee, we'll just have additional meetings of the full board. Because I think that's the alternative to having a longer meeting, is that these meetings are just now additional meetings of the whole board, where we discuss the tip and only the tip, as opposed to our board meetings where we have discussions about the tip and a variety of other things. And so then people can come and talk with us as they're talking with us now. But if that's not amenable, or if it doesn't appeal to the entire board, then the question is, how quickly can we spin around a detailed notes about our TIPper meetings, and make those available to the full board, so they can really read our deliberations and know what we're thinking, when we then go to a full board meeting, and thereby add value to those who weren't at these TIPper committee meetings. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. All right. So I think whatever am aware that there's like there's a possibility that there may be a conversation at the full board meeting on is it the 24th about the role of the TIP committee. I'm not certain we necessarily have agreement on kind of what if we want to make a recommendation to that. There's also a chance that that gets bumped from that agenda. I do feel like we've had a good conversation here, so at least had a chance to kind of clarify some of our thoughts on it. One possibility that in my mind is could we say, we do think, the committee should issue recommendations. We feel like we should not that the same scenario presented to the TIP committee ought to be the same scenario brought to a subsequent MPO meeting. Perhaps that's an alternative, but I guess that's the thing that kind of come from this conversation has come as like one possibility in my mind. So that's one option we could do now, or we could continue this conversation later on, either at the full board if it ends up on the agenda then, or at a subsequent TIP committee meeting. So I'm just going to pause there, see if anyone has any reactions to that before we move forward. Len, you're on mute.
So look, I think I hope we can get this on the agenda at a board meeting sooner rather than later, and have our colleagues who aren't here tell us like what they want from us. And so we, once again, if we could provide as much, as many notes as we can. I know they aren't going to be approved minutes, because we will not have had a meeting to approve the minutes, but maybe, well, I guess no one's running an AI, assistant to take notes, but they could be like AI process notes that we admit that that's what they are, so that we can just give them a really detailed summary, or detailed notes on what we discussed, so they can be aware, and think ahead. That's it.
That's a good idea, Len. Brad.
Chair, so I'm hearing you ask us very clearly, are we willing to get on record and take a formal vote that communicates something to the full board? I think I would really like for all of us to hear from staff about whether that is helpful, and if so, is it narrow or is it broad in its scope? But I, for one, have consistently and will continue to defend the honor and the wisdom of setting up the TIPper committee. I will continue to defend the honor and the integrity of the process that you have advocated as chair and led. And even if this is as simple as saying, we're here, we matter, we're committed to continue transparency and process improvements, that could be one outcome. But I really don't want any misinformation or misunderstandings or perceptions about power grabs to be the narrative at a full board meeting. So I'm perfectly willing to accept your recommendation as chair, or staff's request and recommendation for us to get on the record in any way that is helpful.
Thanks, Brad. I guess I'll maybe, John.
Sorry, quick thought. I just, if it gets brought up at the next full board meeting, well, first up, it seems like, we kind of need to discuss a little bit more about what we're most comfortable with as a subcommittee. It'd be interesting to hear what the full board has to say. I don't want us to choose something and then just have, later on the full board ignore our work anyway and have all our work be moot. So maybe it would be good to get some original thoughts from the full board and then maybe make a decision based on that feedback from the full board at a future TIPper meeting.
Dang. So if I can reiterate, what you're saying is maybe we recommend to the full board that we have a conversation at the full board meeting about, you know, the role of the TIP committee, and then that the TIP committee has an opportunity to collect that input and put a proposal together.
Yeah, I think that's what you're alluding to. That's that being a potential agenda item at the next meeting, which I didn't know about until now. So, yes.
Okay. I guess I guess would anyone would like to make a motion to recommend that this be on this question be of the role of the TIP committee in making recommendations to the full board be brought to a future MPO meeting as a information input gathering exercise to then be brought back to the TIP committee. I see Eric and I see Len.
Is that really needed as a motion? I mean, that's just I think like as chair, you can say like, can we get a discussion of this on the agenda for?
I guess I'll say that I think the difference is that the one conveys the intent of the whole body and the other just is me asking for something, which is also valid, but
So the motion is to have a discussion at an upcoming full MPO board meeting about the level of recommendation that the TIPR committee should be making. Is that right?
yes.
Okay, then sure, I will make that motion.
Thanks, Eric. Len.
That's yeah. I mean, I was gonna second Eric's motion. I was hoping Eric would have just did as so moved on what you said, Jen, but what he said was good enough. So I'll second that.
We will call roll then. Let me pull up the list so I do not. Okay. So on the motion that Eric brought, that I will not attempt to paraphrase because I'll get it wrong. But I guess maybe I will just for clarity. The motion to that the TIPR committee recommends that the MPO board bring up as an agenda item at an upcoming meeting a discussion about the role in the TIP committee in making recommendations to the full board. And that be interpreted as a discussion that then the TIP committee would take some later action on making a recommendation on. Sorry, that's very wordy. Staff is gonna have to help me get that clear and down, but okay, I'm seeing Ethan nod. So if that's clear enough to you all, I guess anyone have questions before I take a vote? All right, we'll take the vote then. MassDOT seat 1. Is Chris on?
I think Chris just stepped away for a bit
Oh.
according to the chat. Yeah.
What's that? Okay, sorry about that. MassDOT seat 2.
MassDOT seat 2, yes.
Thank you. MAPC.
Eric Barassi, yes.
Thank you. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Thank you, Jess.
Excellent. Town of Arlington.
John Alessi, yes.
Great. Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Brad Rawson, yes.
Awesome. Metro West Regional Transit Authority.
Jim Nee, yes.
Thank you. And Jen Rowe, City of Boston, yes. Does anyone join later on that I skipped over? Good. Good. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And Brad.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to have to step away to a different competing meeting in 5 minutes. So I just wanted to ask whether we could get a staff perspective, or maybe Eric chime in as well as Vice Chair. The entirety of this discussion is making me just really want to be extra thoughtful about how that information is framed in agenda setting meetings. So can we get a perspective perhaps from Eric and staff about how you anticipate delivering that message? That again, we as TIPR are here as partners and capacity builders for the full board, not usurping authority or short-circuiting processes, but simply trying to figure out how to collaborate effectively in the mission we all share. I'd really love to hear you all give us your perspective and to welcome Tegan's as well.
Yeah, I think we can report back that there was a lot of thoughtful conversation today about wanting to make sure this committee is actually being useful and is advancing the tip discussion so that when it comes to the full board, there is shown that there's been good discussion and work and that it's being a part of the process and not just sort of like separate from it. But there is this question of not wanting to go so far as to be a place where future scenarios are being, sort of vetted or developed, and it's seen as the place where municipalities need to go or consultants need to go to lobby and advocate to get their thing on whatever the group is doing. So trying to find the middle ground, and that would be the point of discussion. What is the right sort of level of recommendation? And that the group would like to hear from other board members about that. Does that sound right?
Chair through you, yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
And Tegan's even better at synthesizing these things than I am, so.
Ethan.
Yeah, I just wanted to edify real quick in the event that Tegan wants to say something, but I know Chris had to step away and I think he just came back. I do not sit in agenda setting meetings, but Chris Clem does. So also just for Chris's benefit, the question that Brad had was with regard to how information about putting a discussion about the TIP committee's role would be framed during the agenda setting meeting for either an upcoming MPO meeting being the next one for June 26th. That is still tentative. I do want to say that. That isn't locked in yet. I'm not part of those discussions. Or a meeting after that. I hope that's helpful for those who may have just tuned back in. So.
Then anyone else have thoughts on this kind of topic of how this is framed out in agenda setting? Staff or otherwise? All right. Well, in that case, I do want to ask staff, of the two items left in the agenda, my sense is maybe the project scoring and rescoring is actually the one that would be most helpful for your immediate work. Is that the case?
As far as anticipated timelines, the scoring one we were hoping to move faster on, though I would also note that I don't want to cause any issues, but the readiness policy improvements was something we had hoped to get to at the May 15th meeting of this committee and that we tabled for this. So I do leave it up to you, Chair, which one you'd want to go with. But I'm happy to do both if I have to, but
Well, what if let's do the project rescoring first and see if there's if you're able to run through the presentation, we'll see if there's how much conversation there needs to be about it, or if we're all kind of okay with you all going forward with what you're proposing. And then maybe we can do a quick preview of the next item to have further discussion afterwards. How does that sound?
sounds great. And I'm already where I need to be, it seems, as far as scoring and slides. So.
Right. Let's do it.
All right, thank you. So just good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ethan LaPointe. I manage the Transportation Improvement Program with my colleague Adriana, who you heard from earlier. If we can go on to the next slide, what I want to preface today's discussion with is that both this discussion around the scoring of TIP projects and namely the rescoring of existing TIP projects, alongside that other agenda item about the TIP readiness policy improvements, we are bringing these as ideas for improvements to this TIP committee first. We are not looking for this committee to create a policy today or from whole cloth. Rather, we're looking for recommendations that would take shape that would eventually be brought to the MPO board. Before this presentation, I mentioned timelines. I will get to that towards the end of this presentation, but just to say it definitively, any kind of policy we're talking about here is something that it is staff's intent to bring to the MPO board for official approval. So to get into the scoring discussion, back on March 20th at that MPO board meeting, staff had briefly discussed an attempt that was made during the development of the federal fiscal years 2026 to 30 TIP to rescore projects. and why that had not panned out during that tip cycle. The intent of that rescoring effort was because project rescoring was a required stage of the MPO's existing tip project cost policies. And while only a subset of projects were scored or attempted to be scored over this past fall, there are 12 projects that are currently funded in the regional target program of the TIP that were scored under criteria that is incomparable to projects that were scored more recently, and I'll get into that shortly. It's also worth noting that the abundance of these projects are funded in earlier TIP years where the TIP project cost policies were the most salient during development of the federal fiscal years 2026 to 30 TIP, namely in those years, fiscal 27 in particular, where most of the decision-making in scenarios and debate was taking place and where comparison between new projects and historic projects is most relevant. On the next slide, I'm also going to get into and better delineate how different projects stack up to each other as far as when they were evaluated. I said that those 12 projects could not be effectively compared to new projects or projects scored more recently. And this is mostly with regard to how they were scored and the criteria under which they were scored. For those who may not be as familiar with MPO processes, the evaluation criteria that we utilize when evaluating projects through the TIP is largely informed by and developed on a cadence with the MPO's long-range planning process. And for some time, there have been projects that were evaluated either during the federal fiscal years 2021 to 25 TIP or prior TIPs where that LRTP had informed a 134-point scale to evaluate projects under that. Since then, MPO staff have been utilizing a 100-point scale to score projects. So not only has the criteria changed, but for lack of a better phrase here, it's sort of like oil and water to try and compare a 134-point scale project and a 100-point scale project. It's not necessarily fair to either when making investment decisions. On this graphic here on screen, what we've done is just to lay out 5 different ways of defining how different projects that are currently funded in the TIP could be interpreted based on the criteria that were applied to them. The bottom line here is that currently, in the absence of a TIP rescoring policy or process, there is no consistent or clear way to meaningfully compare projects unless they were all scored in the same year like new projects are. But this makes things difficult for any currently funded projects. On the next slide, while the main focus historically has been that fairly glaring discrepancy between the 100-point scale and the 134-point scale, what I would note is that while projects in the federal fiscal years 22 to 26 and 23-27 TIPs had a 100-point scale, they were still evaluated using a vision and goals framework that was established by the MPO's prior long-range transportation plan. And what that means is that while we may be comparing the criteria we're using today on that 100-point scale to a project that was evaluated some years ago, you would still have projects that are not, for example, utilizing the economic vitality criteria that the last LRTP had, but is no longer in place. Projects that were evaluated using system preservation and modernization criteria from that goal area, which is no longer in place. But today, for example, we now have resiliency criteria in the current set, which was absent from the prior sets. And this also again means that projects are not necessarily being fairly evaluated if we were to take a project we scored 3 years ago and try to stack it up against a project we scored this past fall. And just to put a number on it, there were 9 projects that were scored during development of the 22-26 and 23-27 TIPs that are currently funded on the TIP. I'll also note that because of some staff turnover that took place between the 23-27 TIP and the 24-28 TIP, not just my predecessor, but also others involved in the scoring process, some criteria application changes were also made, namely around the methodology that may have been applied to specific criteria, depending on data sources that may have expired, or any institutional knowledge that was previously applied to something like the freight program that was no longer available when scoring took place. There were 5 projects currently funded in the TIP that were scored under that 24-28 TIP process. And of course, for the current criteria set, which is going to remain in place for this fall, and the TIP cycle after that, the 28-32 TIP, we currently have 5 projects programmed on the TIP, and this is the criteria that reflects the current LRTP, Destination 2050. It is worth noting on the next slide, the other reason why a process is important is because repeatability means that we can establish a process that would be informative to the overall cycle of development for both the TIP and the LRTP, recognizing that when the next LRTP is developed, it is likely going to result in potentially, under a traditional LRTP cycle, some changes that could lead to adjustments in the region's vision, goals, or other objectives, or even just the TIP criteria itself. This is to say that with a future criteria set, we would also potentially want to reevaluate projects that we're currently scoring today a few years from now. So on the next slide, just to summarize this a little bit, I'll go into some lessons learned from when we attempted to rescore projects this past year. The big one is that without a formal rescoring process, the longer that a project has been on the TIP, the greater the likelihood is that the current scope of work for that project differs substantially from what was originally scored, whether that's up to the proponent's discretion or changing design policies on MassDOT's side or other factors. It's also worth noting that as application processes and requirements have changed, or data storage methods have changed, older application materials that were used to score those projects could be outdated, incomplete, or entirely absent. This is critically important when we think about an effort that I'm not going to talk about here today, but was presented to the board some time ago, and that was a pilot study for TIP before and after studies, looking at projects that the MPO had voted to fund that were completed, and then evaluating whether or not they actually led to the outcomes that board members wanted to see when they were developed. And the reason why this is important is that as we look to increase or potentially investigate the expansion of that program into a more formal component of MPO processes, knowing what is in the projects that the TIP is currently funding is critical to meaningfully evaluating whether or not they did what they set out to do. I'd also note that if we're looking at a project that has been on the TIP for 10 years, there may be institutional knowledge that has been lost due to staff turnover at both the state, MPO, and local levels. I've put a timeline on the slide here below. This is an example of one fairly, I'd say, smaller project in the Regional Target Program that was originally scored and selected back in 2016 for the federal fiscal years 2017 to 21 TIP, and is currently looking at an advertising date in federal fiscal year 2027 of the next 2027 to 31 TIP. This is to say that by the time that project advertises, it will have been on the TIP for 10 years, and it's very likely something has changed over those 10 years, regardless of how one may want to apply evaluation criteria. On the next slide, what we've also observed on the staff side is that without a rescoring process, it's more difficult for a project proponent to effectively have their project be rescored. When we attempted to rescore this past year, there was no consistent rescoring workflow, and that often confused project proponents or led them to submit various levels of detail, for their projects. In trying to solicit revised project information, some proponents elected to utilize an intersection control evaluation waiver form, old project initiation forms that were, 6 years out of date already, so not necessarily too helpful to current scopes of work potentially, PowerPoint presentation decks from recent public meetings, or full 25% designs, which are desirable, but may not necessarily tell the full story that is needed to effectively score a TIP project. And despite coordinating with project proponents, MPO staff did not find a single case where the information that was provided during project rescoring was sufficient to cover all relevant areas of the project scoring criteria. It's also worth noting that without a formal process, this was a pretty time-consuming effort, not just for MPO staff, but also for the project proponents and their consultants as well. And on the next slide, a rescoring process makes sure that for project proponents for current projects, but also future projects, have clear expectations going into TIP funding as far as how staff resources should be allocated on the MPO staff side and what proponents can expect to allocate for their staff, either for their consultants or themselves. A rescoring process is meant to be timely for TIP development and likely would require soliciting information in the autumn. The rescoring requirement that's currently in place under the TIP project cost policies is subject to the discretion of the MPO board at any time, which hinders the ability for MPO staff to adequately allocate staff resources to actually meaningfully rescore these projects. It's also worth noting what we encountered this past year was that even when staff had tried to be proactive in rescoring projects in advance, without that formal process, when when project application volumes had increased, staff did not have the capacity to score those or rescore those projects. On the next slide, project rescoring also makes sure, back to that point I made earlier, that the MPO staff have access to all recent information about every investment that is being made through the regional target program for the TIP. And that informs how all projects compare to one another. This is to say that a rescoring process is predictable and consistent. And in this way, consistency can also mean fairness. The current approach, as I mentioned before, is too reliant on selecting specific projects at any time, which does not adequately set expectations for project proponents. And a process is also meant to be repeatable so that as criteria evolves with each LRTP, the MPO can limit gaps in information and inconsistencies, which we have been encountering as we have attempted to rescore projects or even dig up information on older projects. On the next slide, what staff are currently tentatively looking at, we haven't developed a policy by any stretch yet, but staff are going to continue to work with this committee to outline a project rescoring policy or requirement that we hope to be in effect during development of the federal fiscal years 2027 to 31 TIP, which is coming soon. In order to enable this, staff are aiming to bring this to the MPO board for discussion and final approval either in August or September. And the reason being is that based on the timeline depicted below, having an approved policy in place would provide, and I see that the graphic here has actually been messed up a little bit, but having a policy in place would actually provide rescoring, proponents of rescored projects 4 months of time to fill out the new application forms that MPO staff have developed for project rescoring. This is meant to address any concerns that proponents may have that there is insufficient time for them to gather this information, or that this rescoring process may be disruptive to their project development process, given they're still trying to get 75, 100% designs in. The ideal launch of rescoring information solicitation is meant to be September 1st, closing on December 1st. So it's also concurrent with the solicitation period for new projects, which would start on November 3rd and end on December 31st. This way, MPO staff can also present all of these updated scores in March of 2026 for development of the federal fiscal year's 27-31 TIP. So this information would also be timely to the TIP development process for next year. Now on the next slide, I'll again just reiterate that this is a policy that staff are looking at. We are not looking for any kind of approval here today. The policy hasn't been formally set up, but what staff are currently considering is that staff would request revised submissions for any projects that are currently in the federal fiscal years 2026 to 30 TIP that were scored in the federal fiscal years 21 to 25 TIP or in earlier TIPs, in addition to new application data on any unscored projects. And most unscored projects are projects that were selected as fill-ins in recent years. So based on the highlight on screen, this definition currently captures about 12 projects within the older criteria set, alongside a handful of others that have not yet been scored. What we would be looking for this committee to do on the next slide is I'm going to very quickly go through all of the projects that this definition covers, but naturally some of these projects that are programmed in federal fiscal year 26 of the 2630 TIP are hopefully not going to appear in the 2027 to 31 TIP when they do successfully advertise in fiscal year 2026. So another sort of question for this committee is also to indicate a preference as to whether or not a subsection of this total list of all projects would necessarily be included in a rescoring policy. I'll just note that just to put it on the record for these projects, this would be the Medford Shared Use Path connection at the Route 28 Wellington Underpass project. This is unscored as it was a fill-in project from the statewide highway program. The multi-use path construction of the Independence Greenway in Peabody, which was scored back in the 2021 to 25 TIP. It's currently in fiscal 26. The intersection reconstruction at Route 3 and Bedford Road in Woburn, which is at the 2021 to 25 TIP for when it was initially scored, currently in fiscal 26. Also in fiscal 26, is the Boylston Street project in the city of Boston, initially evaluated under the 2016 to 20 tip. We also then have two unscored projects. Again, these are projects that are both in fiscal 26, not for the next tip. But these are both projects also listed on the MPO's LRTP, the Long Range Transportation Plan, these being the preliminary design of the intersection improvements at 126, 135, and the Lexington Route 4 225 interchange projects. I will note that again, while these projects would not likely be included in the 2731 tip, it may still be beneficial to have them scored so that when they eventually do seek construction funding for the tip, there's already a bit of a temperature in place on these projects. And then I will note on the next slide, we start to move into some projects in later funding years. We have the one unscored project from this year that was a MassDOT fill-in, the rail trail construction in Linfield, which is in fiscal 26. There's the improvements on Route 3A from Otis Street, Cole Road, and Hingham, initially selected for the 2020 to 24 tip, and currently funded across 26 and 7, so that would appear in the next tip. And also these next three projects, the rehabilitation of Route 16 in Milford, which was scored in the 2020-24 tip, the intersection improvements at Route 1 University Avenue in Norwood, and the reconstruction of Beecham Street in Everett, both of those projects also being scored under that older 134-point scale, all three, Milford, Norwood, Everett, being in fiscal 27. And then lastly, on the next slide, we have two more projects, or three more. These are all in later years of the tip, resurfacing and related work on Central and South Main Streets in Ipswich, evaluated under the 2019 to 23 tip. Roadway and intersection improvements at Woburn Common in fiscal 29, originally evaluated under the 21 to 25 tip, and the reconstruction of Rutherford Avenue from City Square to Sullivan Square, originally included in the tip in 2016 to 20, but is unscored currently, as it was scored through the LRTP process about 10 years ago, but never through the tip process. So with that, that is just the totality of all projects. We don't need to necessarily, staff are not looking to pick out any of those projects here today, but I did just want to make sure that members were aware of what the total list of projects that could be looked at this fall would be. Staff are happy to take any questions on to what any preferences are for this committee as to what a policy should look like and what kinds of projects that it should look to address in its initial run.
Thanks, Ethan. Appreciate that summary. I did just want to note that like it would, because we've had a prior conversation sort of around this topic maybe several months ago, and I just wanted to clarify that my understanding of staff's intent is that it would be made very clear to any of the projects that would be asked to submit information that this is, you know, a form to share, you know, updated information about the project. It is not a new application, because I think that was an important point that came out of the discussion last time. With that, does anyone have any questions about kind of what's, you know, shaping up as a proposal to the full board for rescoring? Oh, okay, Jim's hopping off. John.
Thanks, Jen. I just had a quick question for Ethan. And, you know, if we're looking for which projects to prioritize for rescoring, I'm assuming the oldest criteria is probably the most dissimilar to what our current criteria is. So I don't know if, you know, if you are looking for what projects to rescore, I mean, if the oldest criteria is most dissimilar, it probably makes sense to bring those projects up to where we're at with our current scoring, knowing that kind of maybe the, you know, the projects that are not, that are, you know, kind of more similar.
Thanks, John. Yeah. That all makes sense to me. Steph, did you have anything to add to that, or
Yes, I would just note as well that the primary focus that staff are looking at here is within that oldest criteria set. Due to the number of projects that are in the prior criteria set, that criteria that was used for Destination 2040, that's another 12 projects or so. So we would not be looking at that now. But the other objective of this policy is to establish a framework and a potential cadence for one day looking at those projects.
Mm.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Did you have anything else, John, to add to that?
Yeah, I just had one other idea. I know that this may be more applicable if we even get to it, the other agenda item about improvements with the process, but I know that as a group, I think we've kind of talked about how we want to maybe get annual updates from those who are already on the tip about how projects are going, obstacles, updated cost estimates. I wonder if maybe if we set a policy in that realm about getting annual, biannual updates, maybe the information that you need for rescoring could also be collected at the same time, just so that, you know, the proponents kind of get all the information to you all at once, streamlined. Just something to consider.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks, John. Anyone else have thoughts on this topic before we transition to the next? I will say I think when actually maybe Ethan, if you can move back to the list of projects that might be under consideration. I know there's like 3 slides of those, but like to me it seems most important perhaps to focus on the ones that we or the most clearly kind of good use of staff's time to focus on the ones that we know will be in the tip or should be in the tip next year, not the 2026 projects. However, perhaps still conveying to the folks, the project proponents for the 2026 projects that if they think there's a chance that their project might not stay in 2026, it would seem quite like to their advantage to actually to be sharing information and having their so that staff could rescore the project. Just speaking as I think on the previous slide, Boylston appears like I would we're doing everything we can to get it advertised in 2026 but surely would want accurate and a good score should it find a position of slipping to 27. So just putting that out there. Anyone else have thoughts before we move to the next item? Len.
Sorry, I just want to understand Ethan's timeline. I mean, so you want to present something to the board at the next full board meeting?
No.
Okay.
Fortunately, no. No. So
Okay.
we do intend, once we get better direction, to bring this back to the next meeting of this committee, likely in
Okay.
July. And then we would hope to bring this to a board meeting in August or September for the MPO board's vote on it, so that once that vote takes place, staff have direction or approval to begin notifying project proponents.
Right.
Again, we want to provide ideally 4 months,
Right.
given this is a new process.
Okay. All right. Well, as you know, it just takes a while for me to even digest when you present. I mean, not just you. Most people on staff, because there's just so much information, and I'm slow. I mean, I'll grant that too. I mean, and then it takes a while for me to like pull my thoughts together. I mean, so as soon as you can get us this deck, I'd like to look at it, and then maybe I can set aside some time with you to let you know what I'm thinking, or I can write it up or something. But I really think it's important to do. I just don't have anything close to formulated in my head. So thank you.
All right. Thank you for speaking up for pretty much probably all of us, at least certainly me, needing additional time to digest things after first hearing them. So let's I'm sure we can get this deck out and schedule follow-ups if folks have want to talk things through before our next committee meeting. Anyone else have something they want to share now before we kind of, I think, at least give a preview of sort of some of the thoughts related to the final agenda item? Anyone else? All right. Ethan, what do you think you can yeah, I realize I think this was an hour and 45-minute meeting, so maybe we're quite close to time, but at the very least maybe we can get a little introduction to what staff have been working on, and then with the deck that's shared out, folks can take a look at it, and we can have a more robust conversation at our next meeting.
Yes, thank you. In the recognition of time, I'm not going to go through this too quickly because this is going to be even more information to digest than the last item was. But to kind of preface this on the if we can just go to the next slide, please. Based on discussions that took place at the prior meeting of this committee, and that have also taken place throughout the development of the 2630 TIP, and also even the prior 2529 TIP, staff have developed a potential framework that staff believe would more objectively assess project risk for projects that are either trying to get on the TIP or are currently on the TIP. The objective of what we're calling a proposed 5-year readiness guideline is to establish a consistent standard across all TIP years to flag projects across 3 major areas. So 3 disclaimers up front. Just as with the scoring policy, this is something that will eventually be brought to the MPO board for their approval. We're still trying to workshop this. The other item here is that when I say flag, we're looking for something on the staff level that is complementary to the existing TIP project cost policy, something that can reinforce the policies that the board already has in place, but addresses what staff have identified as some blind spots. And when I also say flag, I'm referring to an activity that staff already undertake during TIP readiness days, which is to identify projects that may be at moderate or high risk for not meeting their programmed advertised year. So if we can go on to the next slide, I'm just going to cover the 3 areas here. Staff have identified 3 key areas that each project could be evaluated against. The first being what we're calling a minimum requirement. This is a design requirement. The TIP project cost guidelines had laid out a preference for projects that were, quote, at 25% design. In the prior meeting of this committee, we had some discussion about what does 25% design mean, as there are many definitions as to what does 25% design mean, and the 25% design process has changed and rather specifically increased substantially in the level of effort required since that policy was adopted back in 2021. What we are looking to see here for the minimum requirement is to denote that any project that fails to meet a given design threshold across each year of the TIP would be flagged as a high-risk project for maintaining its programmed year. In year 5 of the TIP, that last year, and this graph is currently showing the years for the TIP will be developing in the fall, the 27 to 31 TIP. Year 5 projects, which are typically new applications, would either need a prepared 25% design submission to MassDOT, or in certain cases, consistent with the current policies, a project review committee approved project with the level of detail required to indicate a 25% design, and also a schedule for when that 25% design would be attained. We also would then, in year 4, require a 25% design received with comments. Staff believe that is the closest parallel or milestone towards 25% approved. Similarly, year 3 would be a design public hearing, still at 25%. Those are projects that are very close to approaching 75% generally. The design public hearing, I think, takes place about 6 to 9 months after the 25. And then year 2 projects, a 75% approved design or anticipation of that project having a combined 75 and 100% submission. Any project in year 1 of a development TIP should have a 100% design submission. On the next slide, I'll get to what I'm referring to as, or staff are referring to as next stage conditions for projects. Earlier, I mentioned for year 5 projects that detail or schedule for project review committee projects. What staff are also looking for next stage projects are trying to set expectations for proponents to know what is expected of their project for future milestones. So for year 5 projects that are not yet at 25% as far as when they've actually submitted the 25, even if they have the 25, or projects that have a near-term 25, would likely have a next stage of that 25% being designed submitted to MassDOT within 6 months. That is 6 months of March, which is when project scenarios would be evaluated. That's September. That would mean that the project is at 25% before, just as an example, the 2027 to 31 TIP actually takes effect. For year 4 projects, we would be looking at a design public hearing already scheduled for the project with MassDOT. Year 3, a 75% design submission within 6 months. Year 2, a 100% design submission within 6 months. That's where that flexibility comes in around a consolidated 75 and 100. And plan specifications and estimates, or PS&E, on any year 1 projects within 9 months. And critically, on the next slide, because I know we're approaching time, staff also have a cost status request. Now, when we had initially discussed establishing guidelines across multiple years of the TIP, some members of this committee and the MPO board had also noted that requiring an annual resubmission of a project cost estimate would be unlikely to lead to any actual revisions in estimates unless a new design threshold was submitted. Staff are looking to require revised cost estimates in year 5 for TIP projects, referring to projects that would submit a brand new estimate at the time of application. That's what I also said earlier about approved detail and schedule that would look at a 25%. This year, the new projects that applied to the TIP, most of those projects had developed a 25% design estimate before actually completing their 25% design. So that's kind of what we're referring to there. We'd also look for a new cost estimate in year 3 and a new cost estimate in year 1. Those year 1 projects generally trying to approach what the advertising cost of the project, or I should say, what the cost at point of project advertising for bids would look like. For year 2 and 4, staff would also be looking to make sure that no project that is currently funded on the TIP has a cost estimate that is greater than 1.5 years old. It's worth noting, as we also observed during the 2630 TIP development process, there were multiple projects currently on the TIP that have a cost estimate that is older than 4 to 6 years. So again, any project that is on the TIP at any point should either have a new estimate or a project at cost estimate that is less than 1.5 years old. We would note that any project that does exceed any of these elements here would prompt a high risk flag. On the next slide, what I want to note is that the purpose of these 3 parameters is to set a uniform standard complementing these existing TIP project cost change policies that would apply to both currently funded projects and still apply to new projects. Any project that, let's say, triggers one of these guidelines and does not meet standards across, namely, the design threshold guidelines or the cost element guidelines, may potentially be assessed alongside new projects for funding. This is consistent with what is already in place with the TIP project cost change policies for project rescoring, where under those policies, a benefit cost analysis would ideally be conducted, comparing how currently funded projects and their scores would stack up to new projects, thereby having those projects compete for funding if there was insufficient funding available for all projects. This is to say that this standard would potentially create a circumstance in which a project that is not meeting the standards that are set under this policy, and there is a new project that is, may be potentially removed for that new project if there's, for example, a deficit in fiscal 27 like we saw this past year. So again, the idea here is that just as part of when we're making those Readiness Day recommendations in early February, that a project delay or a project being behind schedule isn't already baked into the scenarios. It's flagged and up for potential reconsideration and discussion by this committee and the MPO board when that takes place. So with that, on the next slide, Adriana had planned to compare some of these policies with projects that had successfully advertised, though I am happy, and Adriana, feel free to weigh in here to just take some questions, because I know that was a lot of information, and this is probably, I'm expecting feedback here, because we are very receptive to tweaking this.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
I'm
much.
very happy to talk about it a different time, and we can share the slides too, and the information will be in there.
Yeah, definitely want to make sure we have some time to take a look at all this additional information you've gathered and synthesized, because I think it is like kind of points towards, you know, why the guidelines that staff have proposed here are the way they are is, you know, based on quite a lot of analysis of kind of the trajectory of projects, some of which you saw at our previous meeting, but I think there's some additional information that's pretty important to cover as well. But yes, given the time, I will definitely be, sending this out so folks can take a look at it. Also take a look at some of the work Adrian has done, so you can come prepared for questions and further discussion at our next meeting. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask right now while we have Ethan and Adriana still online?
Well, just a quick question to Ethan and or Adriana. By when would you like comments from us, Ethan?
So as with the scoring policy, we will likely be bringing this back to this committee in July. I think we're currently we haven't set a meeting yet, but it would likely be July 24th for that meeting. This will be discussed further there. But unlike the scoring items, I do not think that staff would be looking to the MPO to actually formally implement this policy until potentially November. So there is more time to discuss this.
Okay, so for whenever you want to come back to us to discuss both of these, by what date would you like to have comments from us?
I would say come prepared for the July 24th meeting if you would like, but I'm sure there's plenty to workshop until then. Staff are also happy to set up any one-on-one meetings if folks want additional detail or any reiteration of any of the information here today. So
I think this is close to a specific date as I'm going to get, but I'm kind of binary that way.
I can't really
Thank
give you a
Ethan.
specific date right now, unfortunately.
Okay, all right, that's it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anyone else with questions before I call for us to adjourn? Thank you for staying with us a few minutes after. All right, seeing none. Would any members motion to adjourn? Or actually, I think there's member items. Sorry. Oh, okay. Seeing no questions on this, let's move to the next item of the agenda, which is members items, I believe. Watch me be wrong. Yes. All right. Any members have items they'd like to bring before the group? All right. Seeing none, would anyone like to offer a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Len. Do I have a second?
John Alessi will second.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all being here. Enjoy the sun while it's still around, and see you again in July. But probably before that at the MPO meeting.
Yeah. Thanks for all the work.
Thanks, everybody.
Ethan,
Thanks,
Ethan,
staff.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you.